The boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. The alarm clock rings at 6:30 in the morning. Not an electric buzz, but the mechanical ticking of a wind-up alarm, a sound that Betty Henderson has heard every weekday morning for the past 8 years. She's 32 years old, mother of 2, living in a 3-bedroom ranch house in Levittown, Pennsylvania. It's Tuesday, May 15, 1956. And today, like every Tuesday, will be devoted almost entirely to laundry. But first, the morning routine. Betty rises carefully, trying not to wake her husband, Robert. He doesn't need to be up for another 30 minutes, his alarm is set for 7. He works as an insurance adjuster in Philadelphia, taking the train from Levittown station at 8:15 every weekday morning, returning at 6:30 every evening. This schedule defines Betty's day. Everything she does is structured around his departure and his return. She pulls on her housecoat, a quilted cotton robe, pink with small floral print, over her nightgown. The house is cool in the early morning. The thermostat is set to 65 degrees overnight to save on heating oil, and the furnace won't kick up to 70 until 6:45. The Levittown houses, built by Levitt and Sons starting in 1952, were designed for efficiency and affordability. Each house was nearly identical, approximately 750 square feet, 2 bedrooms initially, though many families like the Hendersons added a 3rd bedroom in the unfinished attic space. They came with a built-in television set, a washing machine, and modern appliances. The houses cost $10,000, with no money down for veterans, and monthly payments of about $60 including taxes and insurance. This affordability created America's first true suburban middle class. Families who'd been living in cramped city apartments suddenly had their own homes, their own yards, their own piece of the American dream. Betty moves quietly down the hallway, past the children's rooms. Tommy, age 7, and Susan, age 5, are still sleeping. She won't wake them for another hour. Tommy's school bus comes at 8:30, and Susan attends afternoon kindergarten from 1 to 3:30. In the kitchen, Betty begins the first task of every morning, making coffee. Not instant coffee. Robert doesn't like instant, says it tastes like hot brown water. So Betty uses the percolator, measuring out 3 tablespoons of ground coffee, filling the pot with water, setting it on the stove. While the coffee perks, she begins preparing Robert's breakfast. This is not optional. This is not negotiable. A man goes to work with a proper breakfast. That's simply how things are. She takes bacon from the refrigerator, a small Frigidaire, white with chrome handle, perhaps 5 feet tall. Not like the refrigerators of later decades, not spacious or full of special compartments. But it keeps food cold, and that's what matters. The bacon goes into the cast iron skillet. Betty learned early in her marriage that Robert likes his bacon crispy but not burned, a precise level of doneness that took her months to master. She turns the burner to medium heat and begins laying out strips. While the bacon cooks, she prepares the table. 1 placemat, 1 napkin, 1 set of silverware. Robert reads the newspaper during breakfast, so she'll fetch it from the front step once he's up. The Philadelphia Inquirer arrives every morning by 6:30, thrown onto the lawn by a boy on a bicycle. The typical 1950s American breakfast was substantial by modern standards. Men, especially, were expected to eat hearty morning meals, eggs, bacon or sausage, toast with butter and jam, juice, coffee. The prevailing nutritional wisdom held that a big breakfast provided energy for the workday. Many housewives prepared these elaborate breakfasts 6 days a week, with perhaps Sunday being slightly more special with pancakes or waffles. Betty cracks 2 eggs into the skillet alongside the bacon. Fried eggs, over easy. Robert has very specific preferences about his eggs. The whites must be fully cooked, but the yolks must remain liquid enough to soak into his toast. Toast. She drops 2 slices of white bread into the toaster, a chrome 2-slice toaster that sits on the counter. Wonder bread, soft and uniform, each slice identical to the last. The bread comes pre-sliced in a wax paper wrapper, a modern convenience that Betty's mother never had. The children will eat later. Cheerios for Tommy, probably. Maybe toast with jam for Susan. Something quick and simple, because Betty's attention will be divided between getting Tommy ready for school and beginning the laundry. At 7 o'clock, she hears the alarm in the bedroom. Robert is awake. She turns the bacon one last time, checks the eggs, and pops the toast up at precisely the right moment. Timing is everything. The food must be hot when he sits down, but not so fresh from the stove that it burns his mouth. Robert appears in the kitchen at 7:10, dressed in his work clothes. Gray flannel slacks, white shirt, narrow tie, sport coat hanging over his arm. He's cleanly shaven. He shaved last night after dinner, as he does every evening, so his morning routine is quick. "Good morning," he says, sitting at the table. "Good morning," Betty replies, setting his plate before him. 2 eggs, 4 strips of bacon, 2 slices of buttered toast. She pours his coffee, black, no sugar, and sets the newspaper beside his plate. Then she returns to the stove. She won't eat yet. That comes later, after Robert leaves for work. Right now, her job is to ensure his breakfast proceeds smoothly, to be available if he wants more toast or if his coffee needs refreshing. This dynamic was typical in 1950s middle-class households. The husband's needs, particularly around his work schedule, took priority. Many women ate their breakfast standing up, in small bites stolen between tasks, or waited until after their husbands left for work. The morning meal was structured around male departure, not shared family time. Robert eats in silence, reading the newspaper. Betty washes the pan and skillet, wipes down the counters, begins mentally organizing her day. Laundry on Tuesday. Ironing on Wednesday. Thorough house cleaning on Thursday. Grocery shopping on Friday. Baking on Saturday. Church and rest on Sunday. Monday was for miscellaneous tasks, mending, or organizing closets, or any special projects. This weekly schedule was remarkably consistent across middle-class American households in the 1950s. Women's magazines published recommended schedules, and most housewives followed similar patterns. The regularity provided structure and also ensured that certain tasks received adequate attention. At 7:45, Robert finishes his breakfast, folds his newspaper, and rises from the table. "I'll be home at 6:30, he says. "I'll have dinner ready," Betty replies. This exchange, or something very like it, happens every weekday morning. Confirmation of schedule. Confirmation of expectations. He will work. She will manage the home. Dinner will be ready when he returns. Robert kisses her cheek, a brief, perfunctory gesture, picks up his briefcase, and leaves through the front door. Betty watches from the window as he walks to the corner where other men are gathering, waiting for the carpool that will take them to the train station. At 7:45, Robert finishes his breakfast, folds his newspaper, and rises from the table. "I'll be home at 6:30, he says. "I'll have dinner ready," Betty replies. This exchange, or something very like it, happens every weekday morning. Confirmation of schedule. Confirmation of expectations. He will work. She will manage the home. Dinner will be ready when he returns. Robert kisses her cheek, a brief, perfunctory gesture, picks up his briefcase, and leaves through the front door. Betty watches from the window as he walks to the corner where other men are gathering, waiting for the carpool that will take them to the train station. The Levittown community was designed around this commuter lifestyle. Most men worked in Philadelphia or other nearby cities. Carpools were common, with neighbors rotating driving duties. The subdivision had been built quickly. 17,000 homes in just 4 years, creating an instant community of young families, all living similar lives, following similar rhythms. Now Robert is gone. The house is quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Betty stands for a moment, looking at the empty breakfast table. Then she begins clearing it. There's no time to waste. The day's work is waiting. She washes Robert's dishes, dries them, puts them away. Then, finally, she pours herself a cup of coffee and makes a single piece of toast. She eats standing at the counter, quickly, mechanically. This is fuel, not leisure. At 8 o'clock, she goes upstairs to wake Tommy. School days require careful timing. He needs to be dressed, fed, and at the bus stop by 8:30. That's 30 minutes, and it's always a tight 30 minutes. Tommy. Time to get up, sweetheart. The boy groans and pulls the covers over his head. 7-year-olds are not naturally early risers. Betty pulls the covers back gently but firmly. Come on now. You need to get dressed. School today. She's already laid out his clothes, dungarees, a plaid shirt, socks, his kid sneakers. Tommy dresses himself, mostly, though Betty has to help with the buttons on his shirt and make sure he's wearing matching socks. Downstairs, she pours him a bowl of Cheerios, adds milk, slices a banana on top. Tommy eats slowly, still half asleep. Finish up, Betty encourages. Bus comes in 15 minutes. At 8:25, Tommy grabs his book bag and heads for the door. Betty hands him his lunchbox, a metal box with a cowboy scene painted on it, containing a bologna sandwich, an apple, and a small thermos of milk. She watches from the doorway as Tommy walks to the corner where the school bus stops. Other children are gathering there, the Kaufman kids from next door, the Morrison children from across the street. The mothers stand in their housecoats, waving, watching. The bus arrives at 8:30 exactly. Tommy climbs aboard, and the bus pulls away. Betty returns to the house. Susan is still sleeping. The afternoon kindergarten schedule means she doesn't need to wake until 9:30. Betty has 2 hours before she needs to focus on her daughter. 2 hours for laundry. This is the Tuesday routine. This is what every Tuesday morning looks like in the Henderson household. And today, as always, Betty will wash sheets, towels, clothing, load after load, each one requiring her constant attention and considerable physical labor. The boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. Structured, repetitive, defined entirely by the needs of others. And the day has only just begun. Betty descends the stairs to the basement, flipping the light switch at the top. The basement is unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed joists overhead, the furnace humming in the corner. But it's where the washing machine lives, and on Tuesday mornings, this becomes her domain. The washing machine is a Maytag, top-loading, with a wringer attachment on the side. It's not automatic. Nothing about laundry in 1956 is automatic. This machine will wash the clothes, but Betty must manually move them through each stage of the process. She begins by sorting. The laundry has been accumulating since last Tuesday, a week's worth for a family of 4. She separates whites from colors, heavily soiled items from lightly soiled. Each category will require a separate wash load with different water temperatures and different soap amounts. Whites first. Always whites first, because the water is cleanest then. Betty fills the machine using the utility sink's faucet, running hot water, as hot as it will go. The machine doesn't fill itself. She must monitor the water level, judging by eye when there's enough. Too little water and the clothes won't agitate properly. Too much and they won't get clean. When the tub is about 3/4 full, she adds detergent. Not liquid, powdered detergent. Tide, in the distinctive orange box. She measures carefully. Too much soap creates excessive suds that are difficult to rinse out. Too little won't clean properly. Laundry detergent as we know it was relatively new in the 1950s. Tide, introduced by Procter & Gamble in 1946, was revolutionary. Before this, women used soap flakes or bars of laundry soap that had to be shaved and dissolved. Synthetic detergents like Tide worked better in hard water, produced fewer suds, and cleaned more effectively. By the mid-1950s, most American households had switched to these modern detergents, though many older women remained skeptical of the new products. The whites go into the washer. Bed sheets from all 3 bedrooms. Robert's undershirts and boxer shorts. Tommy's underwear and school shirts. Dish towels and hand towels from the kitchen and bathroom. Betty closes the lid and sets the timer. The machine will agitate for 12 minutes. She can hear the motor start, the swishing sound of water and clothes beginning their cycle. While the washing machine runs, Betty begins gathering the next loads. The colored clothes. Tommy's dungarees, Susan's cotton dresses, Robert's casual weekend shirts. These will need cooler water to prevent colors from bleeding or fading. 12 minutes pass. The timer dings. Betty opens the lid and the agitation stops. Now comes the labor-intensive part. She must move each item from the washing machine tub through the wringer. The wringer is 2 rubber rollers that squeeze excess water from the clothes before they go into the rinse water. Betty feeds each item carefully through the rollers, watching her fingers. The wringer has enough force to catch and crush a hand if you're not careful. Wringer injuries were common enough in the 1950s that most women knew someone who'd been hurt. Broken fingers, crushed hands, even arms pulled into the mechanism. Most wringers had a release bar that would separate the rollers in an emergency, but accidents still happened. Women's magazines regularly published safety reminders about wringer washing machines. Each item emerges from the wringer flattened and damp, but no longer dripping. They go into a laundry basket. When all the whites have been wrung out, Betty drains the washing water from the machine. It goes down a floor drain in the corner of the basement, gurgling and steaming. Then she refills the machine with fresh water for rinsing. Cool water this time. Hot water for washing, cool for rinsing. That's the rule. The whites go back into the machine for a rinse cycle. 5 minutes of agitation. Then through the wringer again. Then a second rinse, because any soap residue left in the fabric will attract dirt and yellow-white clothes over time. After the second rinse and wringer pass, the whites are ready for drying. Betty carries the heavy laundry basket upstairs and out to the backyard. The clothesline stretches from the house to a pole at the back of the property. Every house in Levittown has a clothesline. Some have multiple lines. On any Tuesday morning, you can walk through the neighborhood and see sheets and clothing hanging in nearly every yard. Electric clothes dryers existed in 1956, but they were expensive luxury items. Most middle-class families like the Hendersons couldn't justify the cost when outdoor drying was free. The dryer would come later, perhaps in a few years when Robert got a promotion. For now, Betty uses the clothesline in good weather and dries clothes on racks in the basement during rain or winter. Betty pins the sheets to the line using wooden clothespins from a cloth bag that hangs on the line. She's developed a technique over the years: pin one corner of the sheet, stretch it taut, pin the other corner. This prevents wrinkles and allows air to circulate. The May morning is pleasant. Cool but not cold, with a light breeze. Perfect drying weather. By afternoon, these sheets will be dry and sun-fresh. There's something satisfying about sheets dried outdoors. They smell like sun and grass and fresh air. It's one of the small pleasures that makes the work feel worthwhile. But there's no time to appreciate the morning. Betty has at least 4 more loads to wash. She returns to the basement. The colored clothes go in next. Cooler water this time, warm, not hot. Hot water will fade colors and might cause dyes to run. She's learned this through experience, through a few ruined items in the early years of her marriage. The same process. Agitate, wring, rinse again, wring again. Each load takes about 45 minutes from start to finish. With 5 or 6 loads to do, laundry will consume most of her day. This was the reality of housework in the 1950s. Modern conveniences existed, but modern was relative. The washing machine was an improvement over the washboard and tub that Betty's mother used, but it still required constant attention and significant physical labor. A full day of laundry was exhausting work, involving hundreds of trips up and down the basement stairs, hours of standing, and considerable arm strength for the wringing process. By 10 o'clock, Betty has finished 2 loads and has the 3rd cycle running. She goes upstairs to wake Susan. The little girl is sprawled across her bed, still in her pajamas, cotton pajamas with little flowers printed on them. Betty sits on the edge of the bed and strokes her daughter's hair. "Good morning, sweetheart. Time to wake up." Susan stretches and yawns. Unlike Tommy, Susan wakes easily, always cheerful in the morning. She's at the age where everything is still an adventure. "Can I have pancakes?" Susan asks hopefully. "Not today." "How about toast and jam?" Breakfast for preschoolers was typically simpler than what men received. Cold cereal, toast, maybe a soft-boiled egg if there was time. The elaborate breakfasts were reserved for working husbands who needed sustenance for their day. Betty helps Susan get dressed. The child can't manage buttons yet, and choosing appropriate clothes is still beyond her. Betty selects a simple cotton dress, blue with white trim, and helps her daughter into it. Downstairs, Susan eats her toast while Betty drinks another cup of coffee. She's already been working for 3.5 hours, and she's only halfway through the laundry. "Can I play outside?" Susan asks, her mouth full of strawberry jam. "After lunch. Right now, I need you to play in your room while Mommy finishes the washing." Susan pouts but doesn't argue. She's learned that Tuesday mornings are not negotiable. Mommy is busy with laundry, and children must entertain themselves. Betty gets Susan settled with her dolls in her bedroom, then returns to the basement. The 3rd load is ready for wringing and rinsing. Her arms are beginning to ache. The repetitive motion of feeding clothes through the wringer, the reaching and stretching, the constant lifting of wet, heavy fabrics, it all adds up. By evening, her shoulders and upper back will be sore. By Wednesday morning, she'll feel stiff. But Wednesday is ironing day, which brings its own different physical demands. The rhythm continues. Wash, wring, rinse, wring, rinse, wring. Carry the basket upstairs. Hang the clothes. Return to the basement. Start the next load. By 11:30, Betty is hanging the 4th load on the line. The backyard is beginning to look like every other backyard on the street, sheets flapping in the breeze, shirts and trousers pinned by their shoulders, small dresses and dungarees hanging like a child-sized parade. Mrs. Kaufman, the neighbor, is also hanging laundry. They wave to each other but don't stop to chat. There's too much work to do. Socializing happens at different times, at morning coffee after husbands leave for work, or in the afternoon when children are napping. Not during the intense work of laundry day. Betty returns inside to prepare lunch. Nothing elaborate. A sandwich for herself, tuna salad on white bread. A sandwich for Susan, peanut butter and jelly, crusts cut off because Susan won't eat crusts. They eat together at the kitchen table. This is one of the few times during the day when Betty sits down for more than a moment. She's been on her feet since 6:30 this morning. Her feet ache in her house slippers. After lunch, it's time to get Susan ready for afternoon kindergarten. Betty changes her into a clean dress. Children must look neat and clean for school. She combs Susan's hair and ties it with a ribbon. She helps her put on her shoes, making sure the laces are double knotted so they won't come untied during play. At 12:45, Betty walks Susan to the bus stop. The afternoon kindergarten bus comes at 1 o'clock. Several other mothers are there with their kindergartners. They chat briefly about the weather, about the upcoming PTA meeting, about Mrs. Morrison's new Chevrolet station wagon. The social structure of suburban neighborhoods in the 1950s was tightly knit but also competitive. Women compared their homes, their children, their husbands' careers. Status was measured in subtle ways: the newest appliances, the best-behaved children, the most attractive yards. Betty is aware of these dynamics, conscious always of how her family appears to others. The bus arrives. Susan climbs aboard, waving enthusiastically. Betty waves back, then walks home with the other mothers. Coffee? Mrs. Kaufman asks. I've got coffee cake from Saturday's baking. It's tempting. Betty would like to sit in a neighbor's kitchen, to talk with another adult, to rest her aching feet. But she still has one more load of laundry to finish, and then the daily cleaning tasks: vacuuming, dusting, tidying the children's rooms. I'd better not, Betty says. I'm behind on my laundry. Mrs. Kaufman nods understandingly. Everyone knows Tuesday is laundry day. Everyone knows you don't interrupt a woman on laundry day. Betty returns home alone. The house is quiet. Robert at work, Tommy at school, Susan at kindergarten. For the next 2.5 hours, Betty is alone with her work. She descends to the basement one more time. The final load. Robert's dress shirts and her own clothes. These require extra care. Robert's white dress shirts must be perfectly clean; any stains or yellowing reflect poorly on Betty's housekeeping. She adds a bit of bluing to the rinse water. Bluing is a laundry additive, a blue liquid that actually makes white fabrics appear whiter by counteracting the yellow tinge that develops over time. It's a trick most housewives learn. A little bluing makes white shirts look crisp and new, even after multiple washings. The final load goes through its cycles. Wash, wring, rinse, wring, rinse, wring. Betty's arms are trembling now from the exertion, but she pushes through. Almost done. Almost finished with Tuesday's laundry. The last basket goes upstairs, out to the clothesline. By the time Betty pins the final shirt to the line, it's nearly 2 o'clock. 7.5 hours of laundry. A full workday by anyone's measure. But her day isn't finished. Not nearly. The house still needs cleaning. Dinner still needs planning and preparing. Susan will be home at 3:30 and will need supervision. Tommy at 4. Robert at 6:30. Betty stands in the backyard, looking at the clotheslines full of clean laundry flapping in the breeze. The work is visible, concrete. Sheets and shirts and dresses, all clean, all ready to be worn and dirted and washed again next Tuesday. This is the cycle. This is the routine. This is the boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. And tomorrow, it will be ironing day. Betty returns to the house and surveys the kitchen. Lunch dishes still sit in the sink: her sandwich plate, Susan's plate with peanut butter remnants, 2 glasses. They need washing, but they'll wait. Right now, she needs to start thinking about dinner. Dinner planning in 1956 is not spontaneous. There's no running to the restaurant or ordering takeout. Betty plans the week's meals on Friday before she shops, and she sticks to that plan. Tonight's dinner, according to the list on her refrigerator, is meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. She takes the ground beef from the refrigerator. 1.5 pounds, purchased Friday at the A&P supermarket. The meat is wrapped in white butcher paper, beginning to brown slightly at the edges. No plastic wrap, no styrofoam trays, just paper. Betty will mix the meatloaf later, after Susan gets home, but she can prepare some elements now. She takes out a mixing bowl and begins crumbling bread for breadcrumbs. 2 slices of white bread, torn into pieces. This is how you stretch meat. Mix it with bread, egg, maybe some oatmeal. 1.5 pounds of beef becomes a meatloaf that will feed 4 people with enough left over for Robert's lunch sandwich tomorrow. Ground beef cost about 49 cents per pound in 1956. That might seem inexpensive, but relative to income, it was a significant portion of the grocery budget. A family of 4 typically spent about $25 to $30 per week on groceries, and meat consumed a large percentage of that. Housewives became experts at stretching meat, making casseroles, mixing in extenders, using cheaper cuts, and ensuring nothing was wasted. The telephone rings. Betty wipes her hands on her apron and answers. Hello? Betty, it's Doris. The voice of her neighbor from 2 houses down. I'm making a run to the drugstore. Do you need anything? This is how suburban women help each other. Small favors, shared trips. Not everyone has a car available during the day. Robert takes their Ford to work, leaving Betty without transportation unless she arranges it in advance. I'm fine, thank you, Betty says. But I appreciate you asking. Any time. Oh, and I'm hosting the coffee klatch Thursday morning. 9 o'clock. Can you make it? I'll be there. They chat for a few more minutes about neighborhood news. Mrs. Henderson's rhododendrons are blooming beautifully. The Wilsons might be getting a swimming pool. Did Betty hear that the Presbyterian Church is starting a new ladies' auxiliary group? The telephone is central to suburban housewife culture in the 1950s. It's the lifeline that connects women to each other during long days at home. Most families have a party line, a shared telephone line with 1 or more other households, rather than a private line. You can pick up the phone and hear your neighbor's conversation. Privacy is limited. But the phone provides essential connection in communities where women are isolated at home all day. Betty hangs up and returns to her meal preparation. She mixes the breadcrumbs with milk, letting them soak. Later she'll add the ground beef, an egg, some ketchup, salt and pepper, chopped onion. Form it into a loaf, bake it in the oven at 350 degrees for an hour. She peels potatoes for the mashed potatoes. 5 large potatoes, peeled and cut into chunks, placed in a pot of cold water. These will be ready to cook when she starts the meatloaf. The green beans are canned. Del Monte, in a tin can that requires a manual can opener. Fresh vegetables are available, but they're expensive and spoil quickly. Canned and frozen vegetables dominate American home cooking in the 1950s. They're convenient, affordable, and keep indefinitely. With dinner preparation at a manageable stage, Betty turns to the daily cleaning. Tuesday's focus is laundry, but the house still requires basic maintenance every day. She fills a bucket with warm water and adds a splash of Mr. Clean, a relatively new product that promises to clean everything. The ammonia smell is sharp and strong. Betty doesn't particularly like it, but the advertising promises sparkling clean floors, and that's what matters. She mops the kitchen floor on her hands and knees. Not with a mop on a handle, with a cloth, scrubbing. This is the only way to get floors truly clean, she believes. Her mother taught her this. Her mother's mother taught her mother. You scrub floors on your hands and knees. The physical demands of 1950s housework were substantial. Without modern cleaning equipment, no vacuum cleaners with motorized brushes, no spray bottles with specialized cleaners, no dishwashers, women relied on physical labor and elbow grease. Floors were scrubbed by hand. Dishes were washed by hand. Dusting required moving every item on every surface. The average housewife in the 1950s spent roughly 60 hours per week on housework and childcare, equivalent to a full-time job plus significant overtime. Betty works her way across the kitchen floor, the water in the bucket growing dingy. Her knees ache from kneeling on the hard linoleum. Her back protests the bent position. But she continues. A clean floor matters. A clean house matters. What would the neighbors think if they saw a dirty floor? At 3:15, she empties the bucket, rinses it, and puts away the cleaning supplies. Susan will be home in 15 minutes. Betty changes out of her house dress into a fresh one. She's been wearing the same dress since morning, and it's damp with sweat and splashed with water from the mopping. She keeps several house dresses, simple cotton dresses, nothing fancy, easy to wash and iron. This is her work uniform. She checks her appearance in the bathroom mirror. Hair needs tidying. She runs a comb through it, adds a bit of lipstick. Robert expects her to look presentable when he comes home. Many women's magazines of the era advised wives to freshen up before their husbands returned from work. Fix your hair, apply lipstick, change into a clean dress. You want to look attractive and rested, not haggard and overworked, even if you are haggard and overworked. The bus arrives at 3:30. Betty walks to the corner to meet Susan. The little girl bounces off the bus, full of energy and stories about her day. We sang songs, Mommy. And I painted a picture. Can we get it tomorrow? We'll see, sweetie. They walk home hand in hand. Susan chattering about kindergarten, about her friend Mary, about the classroom hamster that escaped from its cage. At home, Betty gives Susan a snack. Graham crackers and milk. Then she sets her daughter up with coloring books and crayons at the kitchen table while she begins the final dinner preparations. The meatloaf mixture is ready. Betty forms it into a loaf pan, smooths ketchup across the top, and slides it into the oven. The potatoes go on the stove to boil. She'll mash them closer to dinner time, when Robert is due home. At 4 o'clock, Tommy's bus arrives. Betty hears it but doesn't go to the corner. Tommy is old enough to walk home alone. He comes through the door moments later, drops his book bag on the floor, and immediately asks, "Can I go play?" Homework first, Betty says automatically. I don't have homework. Then read for 30 minutes. Your father wants you reading every day. Tommy groans but gets his book bag and settles at the table with Susan. Betty knows he'll read for maybe 10 minutes before getting distracted, but at least he's sitting quietly for now. She uses this time to check on the laundry. The first loads on the clothesline are dry now. She brings them in, carrying the basket of stiff, sun-dried sheets and towels. They smell wonderful, like fresh air and sunshine. But now comes the consequence of clothesline drying. The fabrics are stiff, rough, wrinkled. They'll need ironing tomorrow. Every piece will need to be sprinkled with water, rolled up to distribute the moisture evenly, then ironed smooth. Betty estimates she has about 4 hours of ironing waiting for her tomorrow. Robert's dress shirts alone will take over an hour. Each shirt must be ironed carefully, the collar, the cuffs, the front panels, the back, the sleeves. A well-ironed shirt is the mark of a good wife. Ironing in the 1950s was a major household task, typically taking an entire day. Women ironed not just clothing but also sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, napkins, even dish towels. The goal was a home that looked crisp and perfect. Some women ironed underwear. Many ironed their children's play clothes. The electric iron was an improvement over the sad iron that had to be heated on a stove, but it was still heavy, hot, and required hours of standing at the ironing board. Betty folds the dry towels and stacks them in the laundry basket to put away later. The sheets will need to be put back on beds. She strips and washes all the bed linens weekly, so the beds are currently without sheets. At 5 o'clock, Tommy goes outside to play with the neighborhood boys. Betty can see them through the window, playing some game involving running and yelling. Susan plays in her room with her dolls. The house is temporarily quiet. Betty peels and drains the potatoes, then mashes them with butter and milk. She adds salt and a bit of pepper. The green beans go into a pot to heat through. The meatloaf will be ready at 6:15. At 6 o'clock, Betty calls the children inside. Time to wash up for dinner. Use soap. Tommy complains about having to stop playing. Susan wants to bring her doll to the table. Betty manages these small resistances with practiced efficiency. Wash your hands. No dolls at dinner. Your father will be home soon. The children know this means business. When Daddy comes home, the house needs to be orderly. Children need to be clean and relatively quiet. Dinner needs to be on the table. At 6:15, Betty takes the meatloaf from the oven. It's perfectly browned, the ketchup glaze slightly caramelized. She's made this recipe so many times she could do it in her sleep. She sets the table. 4 places, 4 napkins, silverware, glasses for milk and water. The meatloaf goes on a serving platter. The potatoes go in a bowl. The green beans in another bowl. Everything is ready. At 6:25, she hears the car in the driveway. Robert is home. Betty checks her reflection one more time, smooths her hair, makes sure her lipstick hasn't faded. Then she goes to the door to greet her husband. Robert enters, looking tired. 8.5 hours at the office, plus commuting time. He hands Betty his briefcase and his hat. This is the routine. She takes his work things while he settles in. Dinner's ready, she says. Just need to carve the meatloaf. Good, Robert replies. I'm starving. Smells good. This brief exchange is the extent of their greeting. No extended conversation about their days. That will come later, perhaps, after dinner. Right now, the focus is on the meal. The family sits down at the table. Robert at the head, Betty beside him, the children across from them. Robert leads them in grace. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen, the family echoes. Then dinner begins. Betty serves Robert first, a large slice of meatloaf, a generous scoop of potatoes, green beans. Then the children. Then herself, taking smaller portions. She'll eat what's left after making sure everyone else has enough. Family dinners in 1950s middle-class homes followed strict protocols. The father was served first and received the best portions. Children were expected to sit properly, use proper manners, and not speak unless spoken to. The mother often ate less, taking smaller portions, and sometimes not eating until everyone else was served. Dinner was not casual, it was a formal family event with rules and expectations. Robert eats silently for the first few minutes, clearly hungry. Then he looks at Tommy. How was school today, son? Good. We had arithmetic. I got all my problems right. That's good. Keep working hard. Yes, sir. The conversation is minimal. Robert is tired. Betty is tired. The children sense the fatigue and remain relatively quiet. After dinner, Betty clears the table while Robert retires to the living room with the newspaper. Tommy is excused to do homework. Susan is allowed to watch television for 30 minutes. Howdy Doody is on, and she loves it. Betty washes the dinner dishes by hand. No dishwasher. Each plate, each glass, each pot, scrubbed and rinsed and dried and put away. The leftovers are wrapped and placed in the refrigerator. There's enough meatloaf for Robert's lunch tomorrow, and maybe a bit left over for the children's lunch on Thursday. The kitchen cleanup takes 45 minutes. By the time Betty finishes, it's after 8 o'clock. She's been working for almost 14 hours with only brief sitting breaks. But the day isn't quite over yet. The children need baths and bedtime. Susan first, because she's younger. Betty runs the bath, helps her daughter undress, supervises the washing. Tommy can bathe himself, but she still needs to check that he's actually using soap and washing his hair. By 8:45, both children are in pajamas and in bed. Betty reads Susan a story. The Little Engine That Could, then kisses her goodnight. Tommy is already reading in his bed. She kisses him too, turns off his light, and closes both bedroom doors. Downstairs, Robert is watching television. I Love Lucy is on. Betty sits beside him on the couch, not really watching, just sitting because this is the routine. Husband and wife spending evening time together. But she's so tired she can barely keep her eyes open. The day's labor has drained her completely. At 9:30, Robert turns off the television. I'm heading to bed. I'll be up in a minute, Betty says. She makes one final tour of the house. Checks that doors are locked. Turns off lights. Straightens the living room. Tomorrow is ironing day, and she wants to start with the house in order. Then, finally, she climbs the stairs. In the bedroom, she changes into her nightgown, washes her face, brushes her teeth. Robert is already asleep, turned toward the wall. Betty slides into bed, her body aching with the day's accumulated fatigue. Tomorrow will be ironing. Thursday will be thorough cleaning. Friday will be shopping. The cycle continues, week after week, month after month, year after year. This is her life. This is the boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. And tomorrow, she'll wake up and do it all again. Wednesday morning arrives with the same mechanical alarm clock ringing at 6:30. Betty wakes with her muscles stiff from yesterday's laundry work. Her arms ache. Her lower back is tight. But there's no time to acknowledge the discomfort. Wednesday is ironing day. She rises, pulls on her housecoat, and begins the same morning routine. Coffee percolating. Bacon in the skillet. Robert's breakfast prepared with the same careful timing as yesterday, as every day. The morning unfolds identically. Robert reads his newspaper at 7:10. Tommy catches the bus at 8:30. Susan sleeps until 9:30. By 10 o'clock, Betty has the breakfast dishes washed and put away, and she's ready to begin the day's work. The ironing board comes out of the hall closet. It's a metal frame with a padded cotton cover, permanently scorched in places from years of use. Betty sets it up in the living room, near an electrical outlet, where she can work and still keep an eye on Susan. The iron itself is heavy, about 4 pounds of metal and heating element. A sunbeam, with a cord that always seems slightly too short. The temperature dial goes from synthetic to linen, with various settings in between. Getting the temperature right is crucial. Too cool and wrinkles won't press out. Too hot and fabrics scorch or melt. She begins with the sprinkled laundry. Last night, before bed, Betty took the dry clothes from the line and sprinkled them with water from a bottle fitted with a sprinkler top. Then she rolled each item tightly and placed them in a wicker basket, allowing the moisture to distribute evenly overnight. This sprinkling process was essential for proper ironing in the 1950s. Completely dry fabrics wouldn't iron smooth. The moisture helped press out wrinkles and gave the finished product that crisp, fresh appearance. Some women used a more elaborate process, dampening a cloth and wrapping each item individually. Others simply sprinkled as they ironed. But some form of moisture was necessary for good results. Betty starts with the flat pieces, pillowcases, napkins, dish towels. These are easier, good warm-up items before she tackles the more complicated work of shirts and dresses. She pulls a pillowcase from the basket. It's damp and cool to the touch. She spreads it on the ironing board, smooths it flat, and begins pressing. The iron glides over the fabric, steam rising where moisture meets heat. The wrinkles disappear, replaced by smooth, crisp cotton. One pillowcase takes about 2 minutes. She has 6 pillowcases. 12 minutes of steady ironing. Then the napkins. The Hendersons use cloth napkins for dinner every night. Paper napkins exist but are considered wasteful for daily use, they're for picnics and informal occasions. Cloth napkins are proper, but they need washing and ironing weekly. 8 napkins at 1.5 minutes each. 12 more minutes. Susan wanders into the living room, still in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart. Go use the bathroom and then come back and I'll get you dressed." While Susan is in the bathroom, Betty continues ironing. Dish towels now. 4 of them, each one needing to be pressed smooth. The rhythm is almost meditative. Spread the fabric, smooth it, press, flip, press again. The iron's heat makes the living room warm despite the mild May morning. Betty helps Susan dress, then gives her breakfast. Toast and jam, a glass of milk. The child eats at the kitchen table while Betty returns to the ironing board. Now comes the challenging work. Robert's dress shirts. She has 5 of them to iron this week. Robert wears a fresh shirt each workday. Monday through Friday. Each shirt must be perfect, crisp, unwrinkled, professional. A man's shirts reflect his wife's competence. A poorly ironed shirt is a statement of failure. Betty takes the first shirt from the basket. It's a white cotton button-down, the type Robert wears with a tie to the office. She begins with the collar, ironing it flat on both sides. The collar must be stiff and straight. This is what people see first when they look at a man in a suit. Then the cuffs. Each cuff must be perfectly flat, with sharp creases along the fold lines. Betty irons from the wrong side first, then flips and irons the right side. The process requires precision. Next, the button panel. This is tricky because of the buttons themselves. She must iron carefully around each button, then flip the shirt and iron the buttonhole side. Any puckering or wrinkles here will be visible when the shirt is buttoned. The back panel is easier, one large flat surface. Betty presses it smooth in long, even strokes. Then the sleeves. Each sleeve must be ironed flat, with a crisp crease running from shoulder to cuff. This crease is important, it's the mark of a properly pressed shirt. Finally, the yoke, the shoulder area. She irons this carefully, ensuring no wrinkles in the difficult-to-reach areas under the arms. One shirt takes approximately 15 minutes of careful, attentive work. 5 shirts means over an hour just for Robert's work wardrobe. Shirt ironing was considered one of the most skill-intensive household tasks. Women took pride in their ability to produce professionally pressed shirts. Some women sent their husbands' shirts to commercial laundries, but this was expensive, about 25 cents per shirt in 1956. For a family on a budget, home ironing was essential. The technique was passed from mother to daughter, and a woman who couldn't iron a proper shirt was considered inadequate as a housewife. By 11:30, Betty has finished Robert's shirts and moved on to the children's clothes. Tommy's school shirts are simpler, cotton short-sleeved shirts that need basic pressing. Susan's dresses are more complex, with ruffles and small sleeves that require careful attention. Betty's arm is beginning to ache from the repetitive motion. The iron feels heavier with each piece. The heat in the room is building, the iron radiates warmth, and the morning has grown warmer. But she continues. Because this is Wednesday. And Wednesday is ironing day. The telephone rings. Betty sets down the iron, safely on its heel, away from anything flammable, and answers. Hello? Betty, it's Margaret. Her sister, calling from Philadelphia. How are you? I'm fine. Just doing the ironing. Oh, I won't keep you then. I just wanted to see if you and Robert can come for dinner Sunday after church. Let me check with Robert tonight and call you back. They chat for a few minutes. Margaret's husband got a promotion. Her children are doing well in school. Betty shares similar updates. Tommy's good grades, Susan's progress in kindergarten. But the conversation is brief. Both women understand that Wednesday ironing can't be interrupted for long. Work must be done. After hanging up, Betty returns to the ironing board. She works steadily through the children's clothes, then moves on to her own dresses. She has 5 house dresses, rotating through them during the week. Each one is simple cotton, short-sleeved, with a full skirt. These dresses are designed for housework, comfortable, easy to wash, modest. Betty also has 2 Aguda dresses for church and social occasions, but those are kept in the closet and only ironed before wearing. House dresses are ironed with less precision than Robert's shirts. They don't need to be perfect, they'll be covered with an apron most of the day anyway. But they still need to look neat, presentable. A housewife might not leave her house all day, but she never knows when a neighbor might stop by or when she might need to run to the door to sign for a delivery. By 12:30, Betty has been ironing for 2.5 hours. Her back aches from standing. Her arm trembles slightly from the repetitive motion. But she's made good progress. About 2/3 done. Time for lunch. Betty makes sandwiches, leftover meatloaf for herself, peanut butter for Susan. They eat quickly at the kitchen table. Betty's lunch breaks are never leisurely. Always in the back of her mind is the list of tasks still waiting. After lunch, it's time to get Susan ready for afternoon kindergarten. Fresh dress, hair combed and ribboned, shoes on. The bus comes at 1 o'clock. Betty walks Susan to the corner, waves as the bus departs, then returns to the ironing board. The afternoon session is quieter. The house is empty except for her. No children needing attention. Just Betty and the iron and the pile of damp laundry. She irons the remaining items. Robert's casual weekend shirts, the sheets from the beds, more dish towels. By 3 o'clock, the basket is empty. Everything clean, everything pressed, everything ready to put away. But before she can put things away, the laundry needs to air out. Freshly ironed clothes hold heat and moisture. If you fold them and put them in drawers immediately, they'll develop a musty smell. So Betty hangs the shirts on hangers and drapes other items over chairs, allowing them to cool and dry completely. Laundry care in the 1950s required understanding these nuances. Modern permanent press fabrics didn't exist yet. Everything wrinkled, everything needed ironing, and everything had specific handling requirements. Cotton scorched easily. Rayon had to be ironed at lower temperatures. Wool required a pressing cloth between the iron and the fabric. Housewives became experts in fabric care out of necessity. At 3:15, Betty begins the daily tidying. Living room straightened, cushions fluffed, magazines stacked neatly. Kitchen wiped down. Bathrooms checked and wiped. Susan's bus arrives at 3:30. Tommy's at 4. The afternoon routine unfolds: snacks, homework monitoring, preparing dinner. Tonight's menu is pork chops, scalloped potatoes, and canned peas. The pork chops are in the refrigerator, 4 of them, purchased Friday at the butcher counter. Betty will flour them and pan-fry them. The scalloped potatoes are a recipe from the back of a Campbell's cream of mushroom soup can, sliced potatoes layered with soup and milk, baked until tender. These casserole-style dishes using condensed soup as a base were extremely popular in 1950s home cooking. Campbell's and other companies marketed heavily to housewives, providing recipes that were easy, affordable, and reliable. Dishes like green bean casserole, tuna noodle casserole, and countless variations became staples of American home cooking. They required minimal skill, used inexpensive ingredients, and could be assembled quickly. Betty assembles the scalloped potatoes and puts them in the oven at 5 o'clock. The pork chops will be fried closer to 6:30, so they're hot when Robert arrives. While the potatoes bake, Betty finally puts away the ironed laundry. Robert's shirts go on hangers in the bedroom closet, arranged by color. The children's clothes go in their dresser drawers. The sheets and pillowcases go in the linen closet. The satisfaction of putting away clean, pressed laundry is one of the small rewards of the work. The order of it. The neatness. The knowledge that her family has clean clothes, fresh linens, everything in its place. At 6 o'clock, Betty begins frying the pork chops. 4 chops in the cast iron skillet, browning on each side. The smell fills the kitchen, savory and homey. She heats the canned peas in a small pot. Robert arrives at 6:25. Same routine as yesterday. She takes his briefcase and hat. He washes up. Dinner is on the table by 6:30. The meal proceeds quietly. Robert is tired. Betty is tired. The children eat without much conversation. Pork chops, scalloped potatoes, peas. Simple, filling, exactly what's expected. After dinner, the same routine. Betty clears and washes dishes. Robert reads the newspaper, then watches television. Children bathe and go to bed. Betty and Robert sit together on the couch for an hour before bed. But tonight, as Betty sits beside her husband, half watching the Ed Sullivan Show, she thinks about tomorrow. Thursday is thorough house cleaning day. The most physically demanding day of the week. She'll scrub bathrooms, vacuum every room, dust every surface, wash floors. It will take most of the day, and by evening she'll be even more exhausted than she is now. And Friday is shopping day. The grocery store, planning next week's meals, managing the budget, carrying heavy bags home. Saturday is baking day. Cakes, cookies, bread. Preparing food for the week ahead. Sunday is church and rest. Though a rest is relative, there's still Sunday dinner to prepare, a meal that's expected to be more elaborate than weekday dinners. And then Monday. The cycle begins again. Betty thinks about this wheel of domestic labor, turning endlessly. Week after week. Month after month. Year after year. Is this all there is? Is this what the rest of her life will be? She pushes the thought away. It's not productive. This is her role. This is what women do. She has a home, a husband with steady employment, healthy children, all the modern conveniences. She should be grateful. The women's magazines tell her she should be fulfilled by homemaking. That creating a comfortable home for her family is noble work. That she's living the American dream. And yet, sitting here on the couch, her body aching from 2 days of labor, with 5 more days of work ahead before the weekend, and then the whole cycle starting over. Betty wonders what her mother felt at this age. What her grandmother felt. Whether this restlessness, this vague dissatisfaction, is something all women experience and simply never discuss. But she says nothing. Does nothing. Just sits beside her husband, watching television, waiting for 9:30 when Robert will go to bed and she can make her final tour of the house before climbing the stairs to sleep. The boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. Structured. Repetitive. Comfortable in its predictability. Suffocating in its sameness. And tomorrow, Thursday, she'll clean the house from top to bottom. Because that's what Thursday is for. Thursday morning begins with the same alarm at 6:30. Betty wakes feeling the accumulated fatigue of the week. 2 days of laundry and ironing have left their mark. But Thursday is thorough cleaning day, and it waits for no one. The morning routine unfolds as always. Robert's breakfast. Tommy to school. Susan sleeping until 9:30. By 10 o'clock, Betty has changed into her oldest house dress, the one she reserves for the dirtiest work, and tied a kerchief over her hair. She begins in the bathroom. This is always the first task on Thursday mornings. The bathroom requires the most intensive cleaning, and it's best to tackle it while she's fresh. Betty fills her bucket with hot water and adds a generous amount of ammonia. The smell is sharp, chemical, making her eyes water slightly. But ammonia cuts through soap scum and grime like nothing else. She starts with the toilet. Scrubbing the bowl with a brush, wiping down the seat, the tank, the base. Then she moves to the sink. Scouring powder. Bon Ami or Ajax is sprinkled liberally over the porcelain, then scrubbed with a wet cloth until the surface shines. The bathtub is the most challenging. Betty kneels on the bathroom floor, leaning over the tub's edge, and scrubs the entire surface. The ring around the tub at water level requires extra attention. She applies scouring powder and scrubs in circles, her arm moving vigorously until the porcelain is white and clean. Bathroom cleaning in the 1950s was arduous work. The cleaning products were harsh ammonia, bleach, abrasive powders that required significant elbow grease. Unlike modern spray cleaners that work with minimal scrubbing, 1950s housewives relied on physical effort and strong chemicals. Many women suffered from skin irritation and respiratory problems from prolonged exposure to these cleaning agents, but protective equipment like rubber gloves and face masks were not commonly used. Betty scrubs the bathroom floor on her hands and knees, working the ammonia solution into the tile grout. Her knees press into the hard floor, creating discomfort that she knows will intensify as the day progresses. The mirror is wiped with vinegar and newspaper. This is her mother's trick for streak-free mirrors. The chrome fixtures are polished until they gleam. The medicine cabinet is emptied, wiped clean inside, and its contents replaced in neat rows. By the time she finishes the bathroom, 45 minutes have passed. It's nearly 11 o'clock. Betty empties the dirty water, rinses the bucket, and moves to the next room. The bedrooms come next. All 3 of them. In the master bedroom, she strips the bed. No, wait, the sheets were just changed Tuesday. Thursday cleaning doesn't include sheets unless there's a specific need. Instead, she focuses on dusting and vacuuming. Betty dusts every surface. The dresser top, the nightstands, the windowsills, the picture frames on the walls. She uses a soft cloth, slightly dampened, wiping in long strokes. Each decorative item must be lifted, the surface beneath it dusted, the item wiped, then replaced in exactly the same position. This attention to detail was expected of 1950s housewives. A well-kept home meant every surface was free of dust, every item in its proper place. White glove testing was not just a saying, some women actually ran white gloves over surfaces to check for dust. The pressure to maintain this level of cleanliness was intense, reinforced by advertising, women's magazines, and social judgment from neighbors and family. After dusting, Betty vacuums. The vacuum cleaner is an Electrolux canister model, heavy and awkward to maneuver. She drags it from room to room, the long hose extending behind her like an unwilling snake. She vacuums under the bed, pulling it away from the wall to reach the hidden areas. Dust bunnies and lint have accumulated despite last week's cleaning. She vacuums the closet floor, moving shoes and boxes temporarily. Then the children's rooms. Tommy's room is messy despite her daily tidying attempts. Boys' rooms are like that, she tells herself. Airplanes and toy soldiers scattered across surfaces, clothes not quite making it into the hamper. She straightens while she dusts. Puts toys in their proper places. Hangs up clothing. Makes the bed, smoothing the cowboy print bedspread carefully. Susan's room is neater but still requires thorough dusting. Betty moves each doll, each small toy, dusting and replacing. She vacuums carefully around the child's drawings taped to the wall. By noon, the bedrooms are complete. Betty is hungry, her stomach reminding her she ate breakfast 5 hours ago. But she pushes through. She wants to finish the upstairs before taking a lunch break. The hallway gets a quick vacuum. The stairs get careful attention, she vacuums each step, working her way down backward. In the kitchen, Betty finally stops for lunch. A quick sandwich, standing at the counter. A glass of milk. She's been cleaning for 2 hours straight, and she's only halfway through the house. At 12:45, she walks Susan to the kindergarten bus. The brief outdoor break is refreshing. The May air is warm, pleasant. Other mothers are at the bus stop, and they exchange brief pleasantries. "You look tired, Betty," Mrs. Kaufman observes. "Thursday cleaning," Betty explains. "Oh, I did mine yesterday. Couldn't face it today." Betty feels a small spike of judgment. Thursday is cleaning day. That's the schedule. Changing it seems wrong, somehow. Chaotic. Though she can't articulate exactly why. Back home, Betty tackles the living room. This is the most visible room, the room guests see if they visit. It must be perfect. She dusts the television set carefully. The TV is the pride of the household, a large console model with a screen that shows snowy black and white images. Dusting it requires care, a soft cloth, no harsh pressure. The coffee table is covered with magazines. Life, Saturday Evening Post, Ladies' Home Journal. Betty straightens them into a neat stack. She dusts the table, the end tables, the lamp bases. The sofa cushions are removed and vacuumed underneath. She finds coins, a toy soldier, crumbs. She replaces the cushions, smoothing them precisely. The vacuum cleaner attachment gets switched to the upholstery tool, and Betty vacuums the entire sofa and armchair. Fabric furniture accumulated dust, crumbs, and pet hair, though the Hendersons don't have a pet. Betty sometimes wishes they did, but Robert says pets are too much work and expense. After vacuuming the living room carpet, Betty moves the furniture to vacuum underneath. The sofa is too heavy to move alone, so she vacuums as far as she can reach. Once a month, she'll ask Robert to help move the heavy pieces so she can clean properly beneath them. The kitchen comes last. Betty has already cleaned it daily, but Thursday requires deeper work. She empties all the cabinets, wipes the shelves, reorganizes the contents. Dishes are stacked neatly. Canned goods are lined up with labels facing forward. The systematic organization is both practical and aesthetic. She wipes down the cabinet doors, removing fingerprints and cooking grease. The stovetop gets special attention. Despite daily wiping, grease builds up around the burners. Betty removes the burner grates and scrubs them in the sink with steel wool. The refrigerator is emptied shelf by shelf. Any questionable leftovers are discarded. Shelves are wiped clean. Items are reorganized. This weekly cleaning prevents food waste and ensures nothing spoils unnoticed. Refrigerator management was crucial in the 1950s. Food spoiled more quickly than in modern refrigerators, which maintain more consistent temperatures. Weekly cleaning and organization helped housewives track what needed to be used, reducing waste in an era when family budgets were tight and throwing away food was considered sinful. Betty washes the kitchen floor last. On her hands and knees again, scrubbing with the ammonia solution. Her knees are red and sore from all the kneeling today. Her back screams in protest at the bent position. But she scrubs until the linoleum gleams. At 3:30, she's finally finished. The house is thoroughly clean. Every room dusted, vacuumed, scrubbed. It's taken 5.5 hours of continuous work. Betty puts away the cleaning supplies just as Susan's bus arrives. She wipes her hands on her apron and goes to meet her daughter at the corner. "What did you do today, Mommy?" Susan asks as they walk home. "Cleaning, sweetheart. Making our house nice and clean." "It's always clean," Susan observes with a child's matter-of-fact tone. "It's always clean because Betty cleans it. Every day. Every week." But a 5-year-old doesn't understand that cleanliness requires constant work, constant maintenance. At home, Betty gives Susan her snack and then changes out of her cleaning dress. She's sweaty and tired and smells of ammonia and cleaning products. She washes her face and hands, changes into a fresher house dress, fixes her hair. Tommy comes home at 4. Homework. Snack. The familiar routine. Tonight's dinner is chicken, rice, and carrots. Betty prepared the chicken earlier in the week. It's been thawing in the refrigerator since Tuesday. She cuts it into pieces and browns it in a skillet, then puts it in a baking dish with rice and chicken broth. This will bake while she prepares the rest of dinner. The carrots are fresh, one of the few fresh vegetables Betty regularly buys. They're inexpensive and keep well. She peels and slices them, then cooks them on the stove with a bit of butter and salt. At 6:15, the chicken and rice come out of the oven, aromatic and steaming. The table is set. Everything is ready. Robert arrives at 6:25. The same routine. Briefcase and hat handed to Betty. Hands washed. Seated at the table. The family eats. The conversation is minimal, as usual. Robert is tired from his day. Betty is exhausted from hers. The children sense the fatigue and remain relatively quiet. After dinner, Betty mentions her sister's invitation. "Margaret called yesterday. She wants us for dinner Sunday after church." Robert considers this. "All right. Tell her yes." This is how social engagements are arranged. Other people invite, and Robert decides whether to accept. Betty then communicates the decision and manages any logistics. She doesn't make these decisions independently. A wife's social calendar is managed in consultation with her husband. Social dynamics in 1950s suburban marriages were carefully structured around the husband's preferences and schedule. Wives typically did not accept invitations without consulting their husbands. The husband's time was considered more valuable. His work commitments, his need for rest and relaxation, all took priority. Wives scheduled their own activities around their husband's needs and preferences. The evening proceeds as usual. Dishes washed. Children bathed and put to bed. Television watching with Robert. The 9:30 bedtime. But tonight, as Betty makes her final tour of the house, she notices the cleanliness with satisfaction. The bathroom gleams. The floors shine. The living room looks perfect. Tomorrow is Friday. Shopping day. She'll take the bus to the A&P supermarket, buy the week's groceries, carry them home. It's not physically demanding like cleaning day, but it requires careful planning, budget management, and strategic shopping. Betty has already made her shopping list, carefully planned based on what's on sale this week at the A&P. The newspaper circular came Tuesday, and she studied it carefully. Ground beef is on sale. Chicken is a good price. Canned corn is discounted. Her budget is $28 for the week's groceries. She cannot exceed this amount. Robert gives her $30 every Friday morning, $28 for groceries, $2 for miscellaneous household needs. She must make it stretch to feed 4 people for a week. Grocery budgeting in the 1950s required significant skill. There was no buying whatever looked good, every purchase was calculated. Housewives tracked prices, knew which stores had better deals, bought seasonal produce, and made do with what they could afford. Running out of money before the end of the week was considered a failure of household management. Betty thinks about tomorrow's shopping as she climbs the stairs to bed. She'll need to catch the 9:45 bus, which means getting both children ready and out the door early. She'll need her shopping list, her coupons, her budget envelope with the grocery money. The planning never stops. Even as she's ending one day's work, she's already organizing the next day's tasks. In bed, lying beside her sleeping husband, Betty's body aches everywhere. Her knees, her back, her shoulders, her arms. The week's accumulated labor has taken its toll. But she feels a small sense of accomplishment. The house is clean. Really clean. The kind of clean you can only achieve with hours of thorough work. On Saturday, she'll bake. Sunday, she'll rest, relatively. And Monday, the weekly cycle begins again. This is her life. This is the boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. Structured by routine. Defined by cleanliness. Measured in completed tasks. And somehow, despite the exhaustion, despite the repetition, despite the vague sense that there should be something more, Betty will wake up tomorrow and do it all again. Because that's what she does. That's who she is. A housewife. A mother. A keeper of the home. And in 1956 America, that's supposed to be enough. Friday morning begins with a different energy. Shopping day brings a subtle shift in routine, not easier exactly, but different. A change of scenery. A reason to leave the house. At 7 o'clock, after Robert has eaten his breakfast and left for work, Betty sits down with her grocery list and studies it one more time. She's spent the week refining it, adding items as she noticed things running low, crossing off items when she realized she could make do without them. The list is organized by store section: produce, meat, dairy, canned goods, bakery. This isn't random. Betty has shopped at the same A&P for years. She knows the store layout by heart. An organized list means efficient shopping, which means less time in the store, which means getting home sooner to put everything away and start preparing lunch. She also has her coupon envelope. Inside are clipped coupons from newspapers and magazines: 10 cents off Tide detergent, 5 cents off Campbell's soup, 15 cents off a 2-pound bag of sugar.
These small savings add up. Over a month, Betty might save $2 or $3 through careful coupon use. Coupon use in the 1950s was widespread among middle-class housewives. Manufacturers distributed coupons through newspapers, magazines, and sometimes door-to-door. Women collected and organized them, tracking expiration dates and planning purchases around which coupons they had available. It was considered smart household management, not a sign of poverty. Even comfortable families used coupons because stretching the budget was a point of pride. At 8:15, Betty gets both children dressed. This is unusual. Normally Susan sleeps until 9:30. But Friday shopping requires bringing Susan along. Tommy will go to school as usual, but Susan is too young to be left home alone. Tommy catches his 8:30 bus. Betty has Susan ready by 9 o'clock, a clean dress, her hair combed, her shoes on. They'll walk to the bus stop at 9:30 for the 9:45 bus into town. Betty changes into her going-out dress, not a house dress, but a better dress with a fuller skirt and a proper belt. She puts on stockings, switching from her house slippers to a pair of low heels. She applies lipstick, powders her nose, checks her appearance in the mirror. Even for grocery shopping, a woman must look presentable in 1956. You might encounter neighbors, friends from church, or Robert's colleagues' wives. Your appearance reflects on your husband, on your family. A housewife in curlers or a shabby dress would be cause for neighborhood gossip. At 9:30, Betty and Susan walk to the bus stop. It's a 10-minute walk. Betty carries her purse with the grocery money and shopping list. Susan holds her mother's hand, chattering about kindergarten. The bus arrives at 9:45. Betty pays the fare, 25 cents for herself, 15 cents for Susan. They take seats near the front. The bus is about half full, mostly women, also heading to town for shopping or errands. The ride takes 20 minutes. Betty watches the familiar streets pass by. The neat rows of Levittown houses give way to older neighborhoods, then to the small commercial district where the A&P is located. They arrive at 10:15. The A&P is already busy. Friday morning is peak shopping time for housewives. Everyone shops on Friday for the weekend and the week ahead. The store has learned to staff accordingly. Betty takes a shopping cart and lifts Susan into the child's seat at the front. The little girl swings her legs, looking around at the colorful displays and other shoppers. The A&P supermarket represents a revolution in American shopping. Before the 1930s and 1940s, most shopping was done at small specialized stores, the butcher, the baker, the greengrocer, each selling their specific products. Supermarkets consolidated everything under one roof, allowing customers to select items themselves rather than asking a clerk behind a counter. This self-service model was more efficient and gave customers more control, though it also meant housewives had to do more work, selecting, comparing, carrying, rather than simply telling a clerk what they needed. Betty begins in the produce section. Potatoes, a 5-pound bag for 39 cents. Carrots, 29 cents per bunch. She examines them carefully, selecting the freshest-looking carrots with bright color and no wilting. Lettuce is 45 cents a head, which seems expensive, but Robert likes a salad with dinner occasionally. She picks a firm, green head, checking for brown spots or wilting. Apples are on sale, 19 cents per pound. She selects 6, enough for snacks and perhaps an apple pie on Saturday. The meat counter comes next. This is where the most money will be spent. Meat is the expensive part of grocery shopping. The butcher, Mr. Walsh, greets her. Mrs. Henderson. What can I get for you today? 2 pounds of ground beef, please. And a small roast, about 3 pounds. For Sunday dinner? Mr. Walsh asks, already wrapping the ground beef. Yes. My sister's hosting, but I'm bringing dessert and a side dish. The ground beef is 49 cents per pound. The roast is 69 cents per pound. Betty watches as Mr. Walsh weighs and wraps each cut, calculating the cost in her head. Ground beef, 98 cents. Roast, $2.07. That's over $3 on meat alone, more than 10% of her weekly budget. But meat is expected. A family needs protein. Robert works hard and needs substantial meals. Skimping on meat would be considered poor household management. Betty also buys a small package of bacon, 79 cents. And a whole chicken for Sunday preparation, $1.35. Her meat purchases total just over $5. Almost 20% of her weekly budget gone in one category. Meat consumption in 1950s America was significant and considered a marker of prosperity. After the rationing of World War II, abundant meat symbolized America's success and middle-class status. Families were encouraged to serve meat at dinner every night. The recommended diet promoted by nutritionists of the era emphasized protein, with less attention to vegetables or whole grains. A meatless dinner was considered inadequate. Betty moves to the dairy section. Milk, 2 glass bottles at 37 cents each. Butter, 55 cents per pound. Eggs, 49 cents per dozen. A small block of cheese for sandwiches, 69 cents. Then the canned goods aisle. This is where her coupons come in handy. She has a coupon for Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, which she'll use for next week's casserole. She takes 3 cans at 15 cents each, minus her 5-cent coupon. Green beans, corn, and peas, all canned vegetables at roughly 12 to 15 cents per can. She takes 2 of each. Canned tuna for tuna casserole. Canned tomato soup. A jar of peanut butter. A jar of strawberry jam. The bakery section offers fresh bread, but Betty usually bakes her own on Saturday. Still, she picks up a loaf of Wonder Bread for the week, 19 cents. And hamburger buns for Saturday dinner, 25 cents. She needs flour, sugar, and coffee. The 5-pound bag of flour is 49 cents. Sugar is on sale with her coupon, 59 cents for a 2-pound bag. Coffee is one of the expensive items, $1.09 for a 1-pound can of Maxwell House. Robert goes through a lot of coffee. Betty pushes the cart carefully, Susan chattering and pointing at colorful packages. The child wants cookies, a box with a picture of a cowboy on it. Betty says no. Cookies aren't on the list, and there's no room in the budget for impulse purchases. At the cereal aisle, she picks up Cheerios for Tommy, 39 cents for a large box. And cornflakes for variety, 35 cents. Dish soap, laundry detergent with her coupon, a bar of Ivory soap for bathing. Household supplies add another $2 to her total. Throughout the shopping trip, Betty keeps a running tally in her head. She's done this so many times that she can estimate costs quite accurately. So far, she's at about $26. She has $2 left in her budget. She picks up a few final items: rice, a can of shortening for Saturday baking, toilet paper. These push her to just under $28. At the checkout, Betty unloads her cart while Susan sits quietly, somewhat bored after an hour of shopping. The cashier, a middle-aged woman named Helen, rings up each item on a mechanical cash register. The total comes to $27.83. Betty has stayed under budget with 17 cents to spare. This small victory feels significant. She hands over the $30 Robert gave her this morning. Helen counts out the change, $2.17. Betty tucks the change into her purse. This extra money can be saved for unexpected needs or added to next week's budget if they need it. The cashier helps pack the groceries into brown paper bags. 5 heavy bags in total. Betty will need to carry all of them home. Grocery shopping in the 1950s required significant physical strength. There were no plastic bags, no cars waiting in the parking lot for most housewives. You carried heavy paper bags of groceries onto the bus, off the bus, and several blocks home. The milk bottles alone were heavy. Add cans, meat packages, produce, and other items, and you might be carrying 30 or 40 pounds of groceries. Betty manages 3 bags in one trip from the store to the bus stop. She leaves Susan sitting on a bench guarding the other 2 bags while she makes this first trip. Then she returns for the remaining bags and Susan. It's awkward and exhausting, but this is simply how it's done. The 11:30 bus takes them back to Levittown. The trip home is more challenging than the trip to the store. Betty is loaded down with bags, trying to keep them balanced, making sure Susan stays close. They arrive home at noon. Betty's arms ache from carrying the heavy bags. She makes 2 trips from the bus stop to the house, and then one more trip to collect Susan, who's tired and complaining about being hungry. Inside, Betty begins the process of putting away groceries. Everything has its place. Canned goods in the cupboard, arranged by type. Fresh vegetables in the refrigerator crisper. Meat in the coldest part of the refrigerator. Bread in the bread box. Coffee in the cupboard near the percolator. The organization is meticulous. Betty knows where everything is, can find any item without searching. This efficiency is necessary when preparing meals under time pressure. By 12:30, the groceries are put away and Betty can finally make lunch. Soup from a can for herself and Susan. Quick. Simple. She's too tired for anything elaborate. After lunch, Susan goes to her room for quiet time. Betty sits at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, studying the receipts from her shopping trip. She records the expenses in a small notebook she keeps, her household accounts. Every penny spent is tracked. At the end of the month, she'll review these records, looking for patterns, seeing where she might save a bit more. This kind of detailed financial tracking was common among 1950s housewives. While husbands typically controlled the family finances and made major financial decisions, wives managed the day-to-day household budget. They were expected to be frugal, to stretch every dollar, to account for every expenditure. Many women kept detailed records, some even creating elaborate budgeting systems with envelopes for different categories of spending. At 3:30, Susan's bus arrives home. At 4, Tommy's. The afternoon proceeds as usual. Children's snacks. Homework supervision. Dinner preparation. Tonight's dinner uses some of the fresh groceries. The ground beef becomes hamburgers on buns, with lettuce and sliced tomatoes. The fresh corn is boiled and served with butter. Simple, all-American fare. The family eats. Robert asks about the shopping trip, and Betty reports that she stayed under budget. He nods approvingly. Staying under budget is good. It means she's managing well, not being wasteful. After dinner, as Betty washes dishes, she thinks about tomorrow. Saturday is baking day. She'll make a cake for Sunday's dinner at Margaret's house. Maybe cookies for the children. Bread if she has time and energy. The week is almost over. Just Saturday's baking, then Sunday's rest. And then Monday, the cycle begins again. Betty finds herself looking forward to Sunday. Not just for church and the change of routine, but for the afternoon at Margaret's house. Adult conversation. A meal she doesn't have to prepare. A few hours when her time is not entirely consumed by household tasks. It's not that she's unhappy. She has everything a woman is supposed to want. A home. A husband. Children. Security. comfort. But sometimes, on Friday evenings, after a long week of relentless labor, Betty allows herself to wonder what life might have been like if she'd made different choices. If she'd continued working after marriage instead of quitting her secretarial job as expected. If she'd, what? She doesn't even know. The alternatives are so hazy, so outside the realm of possibility, that she can barely imagine them. She finishes the dishes, dries them, puts them away. The kitchen is clean. The groceries are put away. Another Friday complete. Tomorrow, she'll bake. Sunday, she'll rest. And Monday. Monday, the laundry will be waiting. Saturday morning begins later than weekdays. The alarm doesn't ring at 6:30. Instead, Betty wakes naturally around 7, luxuriating in that extra half hour of sleep. Robert is still beside her, also sleeping in slightly. On Saturdays, he doesn't need to catch the train. He has the day for yard work, household repairs, whatever projects need attention. Betty rises quietly and begins her morning routine. By the time Robert comes downstairs at 7:30, she has coffee ready and is starting breakfast. Saturday breakfast is slightly different, more leisurely. Pancakes instead of just bacon and eggs. She mixes the batter from scratch. 2 cups of flour, 2 eggs, milk, a bit of melted butter, baking powder, salt, sugar. The recipe is in her head, she's made it so many times she doesn't need to consult the worn recipe card anymore. The pancakes cook on the griddle, golden and steaming. Betty makes a stack for Robert, a smaller stack for each child. They eat together as a family, something that only happens on weekends. Robert reads the Saturday paper while eating. The children are excited about the weekend, chattering about playing outside. After breakfast, Robert retreats to the garage to work on some project. Betty clears the table and begins her Saturday work, baking. She's planned to make 3 things today. A chocolate cake for tomorrow's dinner at Margaret's house. Sugar cookies for the children. And bread, 2 loaves for next week. Betty starts with the cake. She's using a recipe from the back of a Hershey's cocoa tin. Hershey's Best Brownies adapted as a layer cake. She's made it dozens of times. It's reliable, and everyone likes chocolate. She creams butter and sugar together in her large mixing bowl, working the wooden spoon in circles until the mixture is light and fluffy. Then the eggs, one at a time, beating well after each addition. The cocoa powder, mixed with a bit of hot water to dissolve it. Then the flour, baking soda, salt, alternating with milk. The physical work of mixing by hand is significant. No electric mixer, those exist but are expensive, and the Hendersons don't have one yet. Betty's arm aches as she beats the batter, ensuring it's smooth and well combined. This is just one more repetitive motion in a week full of them. Home baking in the 1950s was nearly universal among middle-class housewives. While commercial bakeries existed and store-bought cakes were available, home-baked goods were considered superior and more economical. Baking from scratch was a marker of domestic competence. Women who relied too heavily on store-bought baked goods were judged as lazy or inadequate. Betty Crocker cake mixes were becoming popular, but many women and their husbands considered them cheating, a sign that you weren't a real homemaker. Betty pours the chocolate batter into 2 round cake pans that she's greased and floured. The pans go into the oven at 350 degrees. The cake will bake for 30 to 35 minutes while she works on the cookies. The sugar cookie dough comes together quickly. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, vanilla extract, a pinch of salt. Betty mixes it by hand again, her arm protesting but continuing the circular motion. The dough is soft and slightly sticky. She rolls it out on her floured countertop, using a wooden rolling pin that was her mother's. The dough needs to be about a 1/4 inch thick, thin enough to be crisp, thick enough to hold together. Cookie cutters come out of the drawer. Stars, hearts, circles. Susan appears in the kitchen, drawn by the baking smells, and wants to help. Betty lifts her onto a stool and lets her use the cookie cutters on the scraps of dough. This moment, mother and daughter baking together, is one of the small pleasures of Betty's week. It's work, yes, but it's also connection. Susan's small hands pressing cookie cutters into dough, her delight when each shape comes out perfect. This is what Betty is supposed to treasure. These are the memories being made. The cookies go onto baking sheets. Betty slides them into the oven alongside the cake, checking the cake's progress. It's rising nicely, the top beginning to set. While things bake, Betty begins the bread. Bread making is more time-consuming than cakes or cookies because of the rising time required, but there's something satisfying about the process. She dissolves yeast in warm water with a bit of sugar, watching it foam and activate. This always seems slightly magical, even after years of bread making. The yeast is alive, eating the sugar, producing the carbon dioxide that will make the bread rise. Flour, salt, a bit of shortening. Betty mixes and kneads, working the dough on her floured counter. Kneading requires rhythm. Fold the dough, push it away with the heel of your hand, turn it a 1/4 turn, repeat. The dough is sticky at first, then gradually becomes smooth and elastic. Bread baking in 1950s America was increasingly unusual. Commercial sliced bread had become so convenient and affordable that many housewives had stopped baking their own. Betty continues partly out of economy. Home-baked bread is cheaper than store-bought, and partly because Robert prefers it. He grew up with home-baked bread and considers the store-bought variety inferior. So Betty bakes bread most Saturdays, adding one more task to her weekly routine. She places the dough in a greased bowl, covers it with a damp towel, and sets it in a warm spot to rise. It will need about an hour. The cake comes out of the oven, perfectly baked, springy to the touch. Betty sets the pans on cooling racks. Later, when completely cool, she'll frost it with chocolate frosting made from butter, cocoa, milk, and powdered sugar. The cookies come out golden and slightly crisp at the edges. Susan wants to eat one immediately, but they're too hot. Let them cool, sweetheart. You can have one with lunch. By 11 o'clock, Betty has been baking for 3 hours. Her kitchen is warm from the oven, smelling of chocolate and sugar and yeast. The counter is dusted with flour. Mixing bowls fill the sink. But she can't stop to clean yet. The bread dough has risen and needs to be punched down, shaped into loaves, and set to rise again. Betty punches the dough, pressing her fist into it to release the gas, then divides it in half. Each half is shaped into a loaf and placed in a greased loaf pan. The loaves are covered again and set to rise for another 45 minutes. Then they'll bake for about 35 minutes. By early afternoon, the bread will be done. While the bread rises, Betty finally tackles the dishes. The sink is full of mixing bowls, measuring cups, spoons, the cake pans, cookie sheets. She washes each one by hand, her arms in hot soapy water, scrubbing away batter and dough residue. At noon, she makes lunch for the family. Sandwiches, simple after the morning's baking work. The children get peanut butter and jelly. Robert gets leftover meatloaf from earlier in the week. Betty eats standing at the counter, a tuna sandwich consumed in quick bites between cleaning tasks. After lunch, the bread goes into the oven. The house fills with the incomparable smell of baking bread. It's a comforting smell, homey and warm. While the bread bakes, Betty frosts the chocolate cake. The frosting is made from scratch, butter creamed with cocoa and powdered sugar, thinned with a bit of milk. She spreads it between the layers, then over the top and sides, working to make it smooth and even. The finished cake looks professional. 2 layers of dark chocolate cake with thick chocolate frosting. It will be perfect for tomorrow's dinner. The bread comes out of the oven at 1:30. 2 golden brown loaves, the tops crusty and perfect. Betty removes them from the pans and sets them on cooling racks. The smell is intoxicating. Fresh baked bread is one of life's simple, profound pleasures. But Betty barely has time to appreciate it. She needs to clean the kitchen completely. Tomorrow is Sunday, and she wants everything in order before church. She washes the final dishes, the loaf pans, the frosting bowl, the cooling racks once the bread has cooled enough to move. She wipes down all the counters, sweeping flour into the sink. She sweeps the floor, collecting the inevitable dusting of flour that settles everywhere during baking day. By 2:30, the kitchen is clean and the baking is complete. Betty surveys her work with satisfaction. 1 chocolate cake, ready for tomorrow. 2 dozen sugar cookies, stored in a tin. 2 loaves of bread, 1 for this week, 1 for next week or to freeze for later. This is tangible accomplishment. Unlike the endless cycle of cleaning that just gets dirty again, baking produces something. Something you can see, touch, taste. Something that will be appreciated and consumed. Betty allows herself a cookie and a cup of coffee. She sits at the kitchen table, actually sits, not just standing at the counter, for 10 minutes of rest. Through the window, she can see Robert in the yard, mowing the lawn with the push mower. The mechanical whir of the mower blades is a Saturday sound, as common as the smell of baking bread. Up and down the street, other husbands are doing the same. Saturday is yard work day for men, just as it's baking day for women. Gender divisions of labor in 1950s suburban households were strict and largely unquestioned. Wives handled all indoor work, cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare. Husbands handled outdoor work, lawn mowing, car maintenance, household repairs. These divisions were considered natural, reflecting inherent differences between men and women. A husband who helped with dishes or a wife who mowed the lawn would be subject to neighborhood gossip and judgment. The children are playing in the backyard. Tommy is riding his bicycle in circles. Susan is playing with her dolls in the grass. Saturday afternoons offer some freedom for children, less structured than weekdays, permission to just play. Betty finishes her coffee and rises to start preparing dinner. Saturday dinner is usually simpler than weekday dinners, leftovers or something easy. Tonight, she'll make grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from a can. Nothing elaborate. Everyone is tired from the week, and Sunday's dinner at Margaret's will be substantial. At 5:30, she begins making the sandwiches. Butter on white bread, sliced American cheese in the middle, cooked in a skillet until golden and the cheese melts. The tomato soup heats in a pot on the stove, whisked occasionally to prevent scorching. The family eats at 6. Saturday dinner is more relaxed than weekday dinners. Robert has had the day at home, so he's not exhausted from commuting. The children are happy from their day of play. The conversation is lighter. After dinner, Betty washes dishes one more time. Her hands are perpetually in water, washing dishes, washing laundry, washing children, washing floors. Her hands are red and slightly chapped despite the hand lotion she applies before bed each night. Saturday evenings typically involve family entertainment. Sometimes they play board games. Sometimes they watch television together. The Jackie Gleason Show or the Perry Como Show. Tonight, Robert wants to listen to the radio. There's a baseball game on, Yankees versus Red Sox. Betty sits with him, not particularly interested in the game, but present. She's mending while she sits, sewing a button back on Tommy's school shirt, repairing a small tear in Susan's dress. Her hands are never idle. Even during leisure time, there's work to be done. At 8:30, the children go to bed. Saturday bedtime is slightly later than weekdays, but not much. Routines must be maintained. After the children are asleep, Betty begins preparing for Sunday. She sets out the children's church clothes. Tommy's good pants and white shirt, Susan's Sunday dress with the lace collar. She polishes their church shoes with a cloth and shoe polish, buffing them to a shine. Sunday clothing was important in 1950s America. Going to church required dressing well, your Sunday best. Children needed to look neat and clean. Adults needed to look prosperous and respectable. What you wore to church was a statement about your family's status and values. Women wore dresses, gloves, and hats. Men wore suits. Anything less would be noticed and commented upon. Betty also sets out her own church outfit, a navy blue dress with white trim, her good stockings, her church hat, her white gloves. Everything is ready so that tomorrow morning won't be rushed. At 10 o'clock, Betty and Robert go to bed. Later than their usual 9:30, but Saturday allows for this small deviation. As Betty lies in bed, she thinks about tomorrow. Church at 9:30. Then home to prepare the side dishes she's bringing to Margaret's, probably scalloped potatoes and a gelatin salad. The drive to Philadelphia will take about 45 minutes. Dinner at 1 o'clock. Afternoon visiting with family. Home by 6, maybe 7. Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest. And compared to the other days of the week, it is. But it's not truly restful. There are still meals to prepare, children to manage, social obligations to fulfill. A woman's work is never fully done, not even on the Sabbath. Betty falls asleep thinking about the chocolate cake cooling on the counter. At least that turned out well. Margaret will appreciate it. The children will enjoy it. Small victories. The boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. Even the days meant for rest require planning, preparation, work. Tomorrow is Sunday. And then Monday, the cycle begins again. Sunday morning arrives with sunshine streaming through the bedroom window. Betty wakes at 7:30, later than her weekday alarm, but early enough to prepare the family for 9:30 church services. She rises quietly and puts on her housecoat, heading downstairs to start coffee. Sunday mornings have a different pace, less frantic than weekdays, but still structured around getting 4 people dressed and ready for church on time. Robert comes down at 8, already showered and shaved. He'll dress in his suit after breakfast. Betty prepares a Sunday breakfast, more substantial than weekdays but simpler than the Saturday pancakes. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon. Orange juice for the children. By 8:30, the children are up and eating. Betty eats quickly, then ushers both children upstairs for washing and dressing. Susan needs complete help. Her Sunday dress has buttons down the back that she can't manage. Her hair needs to be brushed and tied with a ribbon that matches her dress. Her white ankle socks must be perfectly straight, her Mary Jane shoes buckled just right. Tommy can dress himself mostly, but Betty checks him over. Shirt tucked in properly. Hair combed with water to make it lie flat. Face washed clean. Church clothes are inspected closely. Any spot or wrinkle would reflect poorly on Betty's housekeeping. At 9 o'clock, Betty finally has time to dress herself. The navy blue dress slides over her slip. She fastens her good stockings to her garter belt. The seams must be perfectly straight up the back of her legs. Any crooked seam would be noticed and judged. She applies makeup more carefully than on weekdays. Foundation, powder, lipstick, a touch of rouge. Sunday church requires a more polished appearance. Her hair is set in pin curls that she'll brush out into soft waves. Finally, the hat, a small navy hat with a short veil, is pinned carefully into place. Church attendance in 1950s suburban America was nearly universal among middle-class families. About half of all Americans attended religious services weekly, with rates even higher in suburban communities. Church was not just about worship, it was social obligation, community connection, and a public display of family values. Missing church without good reason invited questions and judgment. Your presence demonstrated respectability, moral uprightness, and commitment to community standards. At 9:15, the Henderson family gets into their 1954 Ford sedan. Robert drives, Betty sits in the passenger seat, the children in the back. The drive to the Presbyterian church takes 12 minutes. The parking lot is filling up with similar families. Women in dresses, hats, and gloves. Men in dark suits. Children scrubbed clean and dressed in their best. Everyone smiles and greets each other cordially as they enter the church. Betty and Robert take their usual pew, about halfway back on the right side. The same pew they sit in every Sunday. Most families have their regular spots, an unspoken territorial claim that everyone respects. The service begins at 9:30 sharp. Hymns, prayers, Bible reading, the sermon. Reverend Patterson speaks about Christian duty and family values. His sermons often emphasize traditional roles, the husband as head of household, the wife as keeper of the home, children as blessings that require firm but loving guidance. Betty half listens while keeping watchful eyes on the children. Tommy fidgets. Susan swings her legs, her feet not quite touching the floor. Betty places a gentle hand on Susan's knee, a silent signal to be still. The service lasts an hour. Afterward, there's coffee fellowship in the church basement. This is when the social aspect of church happens. Women cluster in groups, discussing children, recipes, neighborhood news. Men gather separately, talking about work, sports, lawn care, cars. Betty talks with several other women from the congregation. Mrs. Thompson mentions that her daughter is getting married in June. Mrs. Parker shares a recipe for a new casserole she tried. Mrs. Martin quietly confides that her husband lost his job and asks for prayers. This female social network is important. These women see each other weekly, share advice, offer support during difficulties. They know each other's children, remember birthday, notice absences. It's a community held together by shared experiences and mutual understanding of the challenges of housewifery. At 11 o'clock, the Hendersons leave the church. They need to get home, change clothes, and prepare the dishes Betty is bringing to Margaret's house. At home, everyone changes out of church clothes immediately. Betty hangs her dress carefully, it needs to last for years. She changes into a nicer day dress, still presentable for the family dinner but not her Sunday best. In the kitchen, she begins preparing the side dishes. The scalloped potatoes are assembled quickly, she made them enough times this week that the process is automatic. Sliced potatoes layered with cream of mushroom soup, milk, a bit of cheese. Into the oven they go. The gelatin salad is already made, she prepared it last night so it would have time to set. It's a lime jello mold with canned pear halves suspended in it, topped with a dollop of mayonnaise. This type of gelatin salad was extremely popular in 1950s cuisine, appearing at nearly every holiday and special meal. Gelatin salads were a hallmark of 1950s entertaining. With the rise of refrigeration in every home, gelatin became a canvas for creativity. Women's magazines published countless recipes for molded salads containing fruits, vegetables, even seafood or meat, all suspended in flavored gelatin. These dishes were considered sophisticated and modern. The more elaborate the mold, the more it demonstrated the hostess's skill and effort. Betty's lime and pear salad is relatively simple, but it shows she made an effort. She carefully unmolds the gelatin onto a plate, garnishing it with lettuce leaves. The chocolate cake goes into a cake carrier. The scalloped potatoes, once baked, will go into a covered dish that will travel in the car. By noon, everything is ready. The family loads into the Ford with the food carefully secured. Robert drives while Betty holds the cake on her lap to keep it level. The drive to Philadelphia takes 45 minutes. Margaret and her husband Paul live in a neighborhood that's older than Levittown, with larger houses on tree-lined streets. Their house is a two-story colonial with a real dining room and a finished basement. They arrive at 12:45. Margaret greets them at the door, taking the dishes from Betty while exclaiming over the chocolate cake. "It looks beautiful. You're so talented, Betty." Margaret's house smells of roasting meat. She's made a pot roast with carrots and potatoes. The dining room table is set formally with her good china and a lace tablecloth. Margaret is 3 years older than Betty and has 3 children. Her husband Paul is an accountant, earning more than Robert, which shows in their larger house and nicer furnishings. Betty feels a small pang of envy looking at Margaret's spacious kitchen with its modern appliances, but she pushes it away. Envy is unbecoming. The two families gather in the living room while Margaret finishes dinner preparations. Betty offers to help, but Margaret waves her off. "You brought dishes. You're a guest today." Being a guest means sitting while someone else works. It feels strange to Betty. Her hands want to be busy. But she sits on Margaret's sofa, making conversation with Paul about Robert's work, while the children play in the basement. At 1 o'clock, Margaret calls everyone to the table. The pot roast is beautifully presented, surrounded by vegetables. Betty's scalloped potatoes and gelatin salad have places of honor on the table. There's also fresh bread, green beans, and a cranberry sauce. Paul says grace, a longer prayer than Robert typically offers. Then the meal begins. The food is passed around the table in serving dishes. Everyone takes portions, comments on how good everything looks. Sunday dinner in 1950s middle-class homes was the week's most formal meal. The good dishes came out. The dining room was used instead of eating in the kitchen. Multiple courses were served. Extended family often gathered. This weekly ritual reinforced family bonds, demonstrated hospitality, and provided a sense of occasion in otherwise routine lives. The adults talk about family news while eating. Paul's promotion at work. Margaret's involvement in the church ladies' auxiliary. Robert's plans to add a patio to their backyard. Betty mentions that Tommy is doing well in school. The conversation is pleasant but surface level. No one discusses anything too personal or controversial. Politics are avoided. Financial difficulties aren't mentioned. The goal is pleasant family time, not deep connection or honest sharing. After the main course, Margaret clears plates and serves dessert. Betty's chocolate cake is sliced and served with coffee for the adults. Everyone praises the cake. It is good, moist and rich, the frosting perfectly sweet. After dessert, the women clear the table and wash dishes while the men retire to the living room. This division happens automatically, without discussion. It's simply understood that women clean up after meals, even at social gatherings. Betty and Margaret work together in the kitchen, chatting while washing and drying dishes. This is when Margaret drops her cheerful hostess demeanor slightly. "Paul's been working such long hours," she says quietly. "I barely see him during the week. And when he is home, he's exhausted." "Robert's the same," Betty replies. "Sometimes I feel like I'm running the household completely alone." "But we can't complain," Margaret says, a note of resignation in her voice. "They're working hard to provide for us." It's our job to manage everything else. This acceptance of separate spheres and limited partnership was common among 1950s wives. The husband provided financially, which was considered the most important contribution. The wife managed everything else: home, children, social obligations, emotional labor. Expecting more involvement from husbands was considered unrealistic and ungrateful. Women supported each other by acknowledging the challenges but also reinforcing that this was simply how marriage worked. The dishes finished, the women rejoin the men. The children come up from the basement, faces flushed from playing. The afternoon passes in polite conversation. Robert and Paul discuss baseball. The women look through a magazine together, pointing out recipes and decorating ideas. At 5 o'clock, Robert glances at his watch. We should probably head home soon. Work tomorrow. Betty gathers the empty dishes she brought, the cake carrier now holding only crumbs. The children are called, shoes and coats located. Goodbyes are extended. Thank you for having us, Betty says, embracing her sister. Thank you for the cake. It was wonderful. Let's do this again soon. But soon is indefinite. Both women are busy with their households. Coordinating another visit will take weeks. The drive home is quiet. The children are tired from playing all afternoon. Betty stares out the window, watching the Philadelphia streets give way to suburban developments. She thinks about Margaret's house. The extra space. The nicer appliances. The sense that Margaret has achieved something more. But Betty pushes away these thoughts. Comparison breeds discontent. She should be grateful for what she has. A home. A family. Health. Security. They arrive home at 6:30. Betty immediately begins preparing a light supper, just sandwiches and soup, since everyone ate a large dinner at Margaret's. The children eat quickly and are sent to bed early, still tired from the day. By 8 o'clock, both children are asleep. Betty sits with Robert in the living room, both of them quiet and tired. It was a nice day, Robert says. Yes. Margaret's a good hostess. They watch television for an hour, then Robert goes to bed at 9:30, his usual time. He needs to be up for work at 7 tomorrow. Betty makes her nightly tour of the house. Checks locks. Turns off lights. Sets out tomorrow's breakfast items so morning will be easier. In the bedroom, she changes into her nightgown, removes her makeup, brushes her teeth. Robert is already asleep, facing the wall as always. Betty slides into bed, her body aching with the familiar tiredness. Tomorrow is Monday. The cycle begins again. Laundry on Monday. Ironing on Tuesday. Cleaning on Wednesday. More laundry on Thursday. Shopping on Friday. Baking on Saturday. Church and rest on Sunday. Week after week. Month after month. Year after year. This is her life. This is the boring daily life of a 1950s housewife. She has everything she's supposed to want. Everything society tells her should make her happy. And yet, lying in the darkness, listening to Robert's steady breathing, Betty feels. Not unhappiness exactly. Not misery. But a kind of restless questioning. A sense that there should be something more, though she can't articulate what that something might be. Is this all there is? Is this all there will ever be? But she has no answers to these questions. And asking them feels dangerous, ungrateful, wrong. So she closes her eyes and tries to sleep. Tomorrow, the laundry will be waiting. Tuesday, the ironing. Wednesday, the cleaning. The routine will continue. The work will continue. The boring, endless, structured days will continue. And Betty will continue with them. Because what else can she do? This is her life. This is who she is. This is what women do. And in 1956 America, that's supposed to be enough. And so Betty's week concludes, the cycle complete, ready to begin again. May these hours have brought you calm, insight into a vanished world, and restful sleep. Good night.